The winter of 1877 fell on Three Forks, Montana, not as a blanket, but as an iron weight. Along the Gallatin, Madison, and Jefferson rivers, the cold was a physical presence, a thing that cracked steel and split oak. For the trappers, it was a war of attrition. Elias Grizzly Carter, a man who had worked these rivers for 2 decades, was losing that war. His knuckles, raw and split, bled onto the handle of his hatchet as he chipped uselessly at the ice. The river was frozen 3 feet deep, locking his number 4 Newhouse traps in a crystalline tomb. His traps, his livelihood, were frozen, inert, and useless. He was spending 6 hours a day just to keep his sets open and catching nothing. Miles downriver, Silas Vane, a relative newcomer, was having a different day. He moved with quiet efficiency, his steps measured. He knelt by a high, snow-covered bank, cleared a small plug of ice and frozen mud, and reached into the darkness. He pulled back, the chain rattling, and hoisted a prime 50-pound beaver onto the ice. It was his 3rd of the morning. While Carter and a dozen other men fought the surface cold, Vane's traps were safe, warm, and working, hidden inside the earth itself. He wasn't fighting the winter, he was ignoring it. What did this quiet engineer, this student of the earth, understand about thermal dynamics that 2 decades of hard-won frontier experience had completely missed? We are in the Gallatin Valley, Montana Territory, 1877. The air is thin, the land is vast, and the winters are merciless. This is the edge of the American frontier, a place defined by raw survival and the brutal economics of the fur trade. The beaver pelt, though past its absolute zenith, still holds significant value, as do marten, mink, and otter. The conventional wisdom for trapping in this environment was a doctrine written in frostbite and failed ventures. The book on winter trapping, passed down from the mountain men of the 1830s and adopted by the new wave of settlers, was the ice set. This method was a testament to brute force. A man would find a likely beaver run, identified before the deep freeze, and use an axe or heavy ice chisel to hack a hole through the ice, which could be anywhere from 1 to 4 feet thick. The trap, usually a heavy Yerpaf or Newhouse, was then lowered on a long waterlogged pole, the ice pole, and pinned to the river bottom. A chunk of poplar branch, saturated in castor scent, was fixed above it. This method was, by its very nature, a daily fight against physics. The water, exposed to the sub-zero air, would immediately begin to refreeze. A hole cut at 8 a.m. would be 6 inches thick by 4 p.m. The trapper was forced to run his lines, not just to check for catches, but to re-chop every single set, every single day. The cost in human energy was staggering. A man might burn 3,000 calories simply maintaining his sets, before even accounting for the miles walked in snowshoes, the wood split, or the pelts skinned. This was the right way, because it was the hard way. And on the frontier, difficulty was often mistaken for effectiveness. Elias Carter was a disciple of this hard way. Let us examine his operation on the Madison River in the 2nd week of December 1877. Carter has a line of 15 ice sets. To establish this line, he spent 3 days of back-breaking labor, cutting through ice that averaged 30 inches in thickness. His equipment is standard: a 4-pound axe, a heavy steel ice chisel, and 15 12-pound Newhouse traps. The temperature on this particular morning is 22 degrees Celsius, 30 degrees C, with a wind out of the north that drives the effective temperature down to 50 degrees, 45 degrees C. Carter rises before dawn, his hands already stiff. It takes him an hour to reach his first set. The hole he cut less than 24 hours ago is now a solid plug of ice, 10 inches thick. He begins to chop. Each swing is an agony. Chips of ice fly back, stinging his face. His breath freezes instantly on his beard. It takes him 20 minutes of continuous hard labor to open the hole. He pulls his trap, it is empty, and the mechanism is frozen shut with anchor ice that formed on the metal. He must take the entire trap back to his cabin to thaw it by the fire, rendering it useless for the day. He moves to the next set. This one has a catch, a small kit beaver, but it is not drowned. The ice formed too quickly. The trap pole froze in place, and the animal is frozen solid in the ice, its pelt ruined. By noon, Carter has checked 6 of his 15 sets. He has managed to reset 2. He has no usable pelts. His hands are pale white, the first stage of deep frostbite. His energy is gone. He is consuming his winter stores just to fuel the labor of not catching fur. The traditional method, the only method he knows, is failing catastrophically. The system isn't just inefficient, it's a net loss of energy, supplies, and morale. Silas Vane was not a product of the Montana River systems. He was a man shaped by a different kind of hardship. Born in Vermont, he had served a 4-year term with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers during the Civil War. His war was not fought on the front lines with a rifle, but in the mud and clay of Virginia, digging saps, trenches, and bomb-proof shelters. He had learned, under fire, the structural integrity of earth and the insulating properties of soil. He understood, in a way a surface dweller could not, that 6 feet of dirt was a more effective shield against a cannonball, or the cold, than a foot of solid oak. After the war, he sought quiet and ended up trapping not in the Rockies, but in the high, cold bogs of northern Maine. It was there he first encountered the techniques of the Penobscot and Maliseet peoples. He watched them trap beaver in the dead of winter, not by chopping ice, but by identifying the telltale steam vents from the lodges. More importantly, he learned from them how to read the earth. He learned that while the air temperature might be 30 degrees Fahrenheit, the water flowing from an underground spring remained a constant 38 degrees Fahrenheit, 3.3 degrees Fahrenheit. He saw how animals instinctively used these thermal refuges. He learned the concept of the frost line, the depth to which the ground freezes. Above it was a world of lethal, variable temperatures. Below it was a world of stable, life-sustaining warmth. When he arrived in Montana in 1876, he brought this engineering mindset. He saw the trappers like Carter fighting the ice and thought it was madness. He was met with suspicion. He was quiet, methodical, and carried a spade along with his rifle. He spent more time studying the riverbanks than setting traps. Carter and the others called him the Digger, or Badger Vane. They saw his focus on the earth as lazy, an attempt to avoid the real work of chopping ice. Vane's first prototype was a failure, but a crucial learning experience. In the fall of 1876, he tried to implement his idea on a low, gravelly bank of the Jefferson River. He dug a horizontal shaft about 2 feet wide, straight into the bank just above the waterline. He planned to set his trap deep inside, protected from the air. But he misjudged the soil. The first rain caused the gravelly soil to slump, and his tunnel collapsed. He had learned an engineering lesson. Site selection was paramount. The following autumn, 1877, he chose his locations with geological precision. He bypassed the easy, low banks and focused on high, stable-looking bluffs, specifically those with a high percentage of clay soil, which would hold its shape. He began his work not in the dead of winter, but in late October, when the digging was still manageable. He selected a spot on the Gallatin. He didn't just dig. He engineered. He started his excavation 12 inches below the visible waterline, forcing him to work in the numbing 40 degrees water. This was critical. He knew the river level would drop in the deep freeze, and he needed his entrance to remain submerged, creating a water-filled trap that would prevent the cold air from flowing in and freezing the chamber. He dug horizontally into the bank for 5 feet, using a short-handled spade and a small military pick. The tunnel was just 18 inches square. At the end of the 5-foot tunnel, he hollowed out a small chamber, about 2 feet high and 2 feet wide. He lined the top of this chamber with flat stones he'd gathered, preventing a cave-in. The entire structure was a miniature, water-filled bunker, insulated on all sides, and especially from above, by 6 feet of dense, insulating earth. While Carter was sharpening his axe, Vane was positioning a single Nora-4 trap on a platform in this dark, stable 38-degree cave chamber. The others saw him, soaked to the waist in the cold October water, digging in the mud. They laughed. "Building a house for the muskrats, Vane?" Carter had yelled. Vane just nodded and kept digging. The conflict between Silas Vane and Elias Carter was not one of personalities, but of physics. Carter was a warrior of the visible world. He saw the enemy, the ice, and he attacked it with force. His entire philosophy was based on confrontation. To him, winter was an adversary to be overcome by superior endurance and strength. A thicker wall, a bigger fire, a heavier axe. If a 1-foot-thick ice sheet was the problem, a 2-foot-thick ice sheet was simply a bigger problem, requiring more chopping. He was in a direct tactical battle with thermodynamics, and he was losing because the environment could produce more cold than he could produce energy. Silas Vane, the engineer, saw it differently. He was a student of the invisible world. His philosophy was based on avoidance. He understood the principles of thermal mass, insulation, and geothermal stability. The enemy was not the ice. The enemy was heat loss. Vane knew the ground itself was a thermal battery. The earth, below the frost line, which in that part of Montana could be 5 to 6 feet deep, maintains a remarkably constant temperature, averaging 40 to 50 degrees hours, 4-10 degrees. Vane's underground shelters were not designed to fight the 30-degree air temperature. They were designed to bypass it entirely. By creating a set that was, for all intents and purposes, 6 feet underground and connected to a body of river water, he was placing his trap in a microenvironment that could not freeze. The battle was not of brawn, but of strategy. Carter was trying to heat the entire outdoors with his own body heat. Vane had simply moved his operation into a region where winter didn't exist. The proof of this philosophy arrived with the fur buyer from Bozeman, a man named Abernathy. Abernathy was not a frontiersman. He was a businessman. He traveled with a ledger, a scale, and a pocket thermometer, and he believed only in numbers. He arrived at Three Forks in early January 1878, after a solid month of sub-zero temperatures. He first visited Carter's cabin. The ledger entry was grim. Carter, haggard and with 2 fingers on his left hand wrapped in bandages, frostbite, had only 4 marten pelts and 1 mink to sell, all land-based animals. "The beaver are frozen out," Carter stated. "River's locked up. Can't get to 'em." Abernathy noted this in his ledger. He then proceeded to Silas Vane's cabin. The scene was different. Vane was calm, his cabin organized. He presented for sale 14 prime beaver pelts, 3 river otter, and 2 mink. The pelts were flawless, perfectly skinned and stretched. Abernathy was stunned. These were not old pelts from the fall. They were fresh. "There must be a thaw on your section of the river," Abernathy remarked. Vane shook his head. "No thaw, sir, just a different kind of set." Abernathy, deeply skeptical, asked for a demonstration. Vane took him to one of his bank sets. Abernathy looked at the thermometer on his coat. 18 degrees here. Vane then cleared the small frozen plug at the tunnel's mouth, and Abernathy lowered his pocket thermometer on a string into the dark, watery chamber. He pulled it out a minute later. The mercury read 36 degrees, 2.22 degrees. It was a 54-degree difference. It was not magic. It was engineering. Abernathy recorded the data in his ledger. The numbers were undeniable. Let us deconstruct Silas Vane's geothermal bank set as a piece of frontier engineering. It was a system of 5 distinct layers of defense against the cold. The first layer was site selection. Vane chose a high, clay-heavy bank, not a low gravel bar. This clay was structurally sound, allowing for a tunnel that would not collapse. The height of the bank, at least 8 feet above the waterline, was crucial. It provided the thermal mass that would serve as the primary insulation. The second layer was strategic excavation. The tunnel entrance was dug below the winter waterline. This was the single most brilliant and counterintuitive part of the design. While it made the construction miserably cold and wet, it created a perfect U-bend waterlock, like a modern plumbing trap. The 30-degree air could not flow into the tunnel because the entrance was submerged. The only thermal transfer was through slow conduction with the water, which was constantly, slowly being refreshed by the slightly warmer river flow. The third layer was insulation. This was the 6 to 8 feet of virgin earth above the chamber. This massive blanket of soil and clay was the primary defense. The 30-degree cold at the surface would take weeks to penetrate even 3 feet down. By the time the cold began to creep that deep, the Earth's own geothermal heat, or rather its massive thermal stability, would halt it. The frost line might be 5 feet deep, but Vane's chamber was at that line, horizontally, safe from the surface. The fourth layer was the chamber design. It was small, no larger than necessary. This minimized the amount of water that needed to be kept warm. He placed his bait, a piece of poplar soaked in beaver castoreum, on a small stick above the water line at the very back of the chamber. The scent would then travel out of the tunnel and into the main river channel, carried by the slow water movement, a scent signal in a scentless frozen world. The beaver or otter, smelling fresh-cut wood and castor, would follow the signal into the dark, seemingly safe, den. The final layer was the trap mechanism itself, a standard Nura 4 trap, but Vane treated it differently. He boiled it with poplar bark to remove any human or metallic scent, and he placed it on a small, heavy, waterlogged platform so it would not be moved by the animal. The set was designed for a quick, drowning catch, the animal's natural instinct being to dive when caught. This entire system, a 5-foot-long, 18-inch square, water-sealed tunnel leading to a 282-foot chamber, insulated by 6 vertical feet of earth, was Vane's solution. It took him 2 full days to build one, but once built, it would function with near-perfect efficiency from the first freeze to the spring thaw. The true test of these two philosophies came in the final week of January 1878. A Siberian air mass, as the papers in Helena would later call it, descended on the territory. For 3 solid weeks, the temperature at Three Forks never rose above 29 degrees. The nightly lows dropped to an unimaginable 44 degrees. This was not just cold. It was a cessation of the natural world. Trees exploded as their sap froze. The rivers, already 3 feet thick with ice, began to freeze to the bottom in the shallows, creating anchor ice that choked the flow. For Elias Carter, it was the end. His 15 sets were gone, buried under snowdrifts and encased in ice so thick his axe glanced off it. His ice chisel, struck against the 40-degree rock-hard ice, shattered. He retreated to his cabin, burning through his woodpile, his hands now useless, his livelihood destroyed. He was a man defeated by a force he could not overcome. On the Gallatin, Silas Vane was also tested, but his system was not. The snowdrifts buried his locations, but he had marked them with tall willow wands. The 48 degrees of air froze the top 12 inches of the river solid in 24 hours. The entrances to his tunnels, the small 18-inch openings, were frozen shut with a plug of ice. But this was the key. He only had to clear a plug of ice, not a sheet. He used his ice chisel for 10 minutes to clear the opening. He would break through, and the 36-degree water from inside the chamber would flow out, melting the edges. He would reach into the dark, shielded from the lethal wind, and check his trap in the relative warmth of the earth. During this 3-week polar vortex, the period when Carter caught nothing and nearly died, Vane's ledger showed he harvested 11 prime beaver and 4 otter. His system performed exactly as designed. The cold outside was irrelevant. The human impact of this technical success was profound. Carter, his supplies exhausted and his pride broken, walked the 5 miles to Vane's cabin. He was not coming as a rival, but as a beggar. He expected to find Vane in a similar state of deprivation. Instead, he found a scene of calm industry. Vane's wife, Sarah, was scraping a fresh beaver pelt by the light of the window. The cabin was warm, the woodpile high, and the smell of stew filled the air. Vane himself was mending a snowshoe. Carter stood at the door, a man undone. Vane, seeing the state of his neighbor's bandaged hands, did not mock him. He offered him coffee and a seat by the fire. It was Sarah Vane who managed the operational logistics of this newfound efficiency. While Silas had the engineering mind, she had the management mind. She explained to Carter, in simple terms, the economy of energy. "Mr. Carter," she said, "you spent 10 calories of energy for every 1 calorie of food you captured. Silas spends 1 calorie of energy digging in the fall to capture 10. This cold spell just revealed the math. Vane, in an act of community, gave Carter a 20-pound sack of flour and half a salt pork. But Carter didn't just want food. He wanted the knowledge. "Show me," he said. The next day, Silas Vane took Elias Carter, his most vocal critic, to a high clay bank and handed him a spade. The apprentice of the old, broken way began to learn the new. When Abernathy returned in March for the final buy of the season, the landscape of the fur trade at Three Forks had been rewritten. Carter, working Vane's system, had a small but respectable cache of pelts. 2 other trapping groups, having seen Carter and Vane digging beaver dens in the dead of winter, had copied the method with moderate success. The data Abernathy collected for the St. Louis Fur Company was revolutionary. His report read less like a fur ledger and more like an engineering abstract. He created a comparative chart. Elias Carter, traditional ice set method. 45 man-hours per week of set maintenance. Chopping. Fuel consumption. Wood. High, for thawing, self, and traps. Pelt return, Jan 1, Feb 15. 0 beaver, 2 marten. Silas Vane, geothermal bank. Set method. 3 man-hours per week of set maintenance, clearing plugs. Fuel consumption, wood. Low, pelt return, Jan 1, Feb 15. 18 beaver, 5 otter. The statistics were brutal. Vane's method was not just an improvement, it was a 100-fold increase in efficiency during extreme conditions. The fur company, which had previously supplied trappers with heavy-gauge ice chisels, began adding short-handled spades and military-style picks to its inventory lists. By the winter of 1880, a man walking the riverbanks near Three Forks would no longer see the large, dangerous holes of the ice set. Instead, he would see the subtle, almost invisible signs of Vane's system. Small marker wands on high banks, and the occasional trace of mud on the snow. The underground shelter had become the new conventional wisdom. Vane's legacy was not one of fame. He remained a quiet, methodical man. His contribution was a shift in thinking. He had proven that on the frontier, survival was not a function of brute strength, but of quiet observation. It was not about enduring the pain of the cold. It was about understanding why the cold existed, and placing oneself and one's livelihood outside of its reach. The lesson, written in the frozen mud of the Gallatin River, was simple. Do not fight the system. Understand it. Do not attack the 40-degree affair. Use the 40-degree of earth. The greatest tool of the frontier engineer was not the axe, but the mind that knew, in the face of a landscape that screamed for brute force, precisely where to dig.